Habt ihr euch jemals gefragt, wie ihr auf einer Konferenz fremde Leute ansprechen könnt, ohne euch unbehaglich zu fühlen? Oder wie man das Beste aus sozialen Netzwerken wie LinkedIn herausholt? In dieser Folge geben wir euch 6 essentielle Networking-Tipps mit an die Hand, die auch wissenschaftlich untersucht sind. Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer weiteren spannenden Episode unseres Well Connected Podcasts. Ich freue mich sehr, dass ihr heute wieder dabei seid. Der Well Connected Podcast entsteht im Rahmen des Forschungsprojektes DigiNet, Erfolgsfaktoren von digitalem Networking, einem Forschungsprojekt, was im Verbund von Technischer Hochschule Köln und Universität zu Köln unter der Förderung von der Rhein-Energie-Stiftung bearbeitet wird. HG war jetzt im Sommer auf einer Konferenz in Chicago, Illinois und hatte das besondere Vergnügen, Professorin Dr. Monika Forret zu interviewen. Monika Forret ist nicht nur Professorin für Management an der University of St. Ambrose in Davenport, Iowa, sondern auch eine ausgewiesene Expertin in den Bereichen Karriereentwicklung, Mentoring, Geschlechterunterschiede und natürlich Networking. Im Gespräch werden wir außerdem tief in die Welt des Networkings eintauchen. Monika und HG, die haben sich vor vielen Jahren auf einer Konferenz in Hawaii kennengelernt und seitdem zusammen an verschiedenen Projekten gearbeitet. Ein Beispiel, wie eine einzelne Begegnung langfristige und wertvolle berufliche Verbindungen schaffen kann. Monika wird außerdem ihre wertvollsten Erkenntnisse aus ihrer langjährigen Forschung und Erfahrungen im Bereich Networking mit uns teilen. Sie wird erläutern, wie wichtig es ist, Netzwerke aufzubauen und zu pflegen und uns praktische Tipps geben, wie wir erfolgreiche Netzwerke gestalten können. Außerdem werden wir über die Herausforderungen und Chancen des Online-Networkings sprechen und einen Blick in die Zukunft dieser essentiellen Fähigkeit werfen. Ein kleiner Hinweis, bevor es losgeht: Das Interview mit Monika wird auf Englisch sein. Falls es für euch nicht leicht sein wird, Englisch zu verstehen, dann werde ich euch am Ende dieses Podcasts nochmal eine Zusammenfassung über die Hauptaussagen und Tipps von Monika Forret geben.
Welcome to this podcast, Well Connected again, and my name is Hagi Wolff. I'm your host today, and actually I'm in Chicago, Illinois, interviewing Professor Dr. Monika Forret, who's not from Chicago, but is at the University of St. Ambrose in Davenport, Iowa. For Americans, that's just very close to Chicago. Actually, it's a 3-hour drive, just about. And I'm very happy to have you here. You're not only a professor of management, you're also the director of the doctoral program of business administration. And you're an expert on quite a few topics. We're talking about networking today, but I'd just like to mention that you've also published things in careers, on mentoring, on gender differences, on networking trainings, on job search, and I probably forgot. There's also temporal workers that I know of, and I probably forgot quite a few other papers that you wrote. And I'm very glad to be sitting here and having you as a guest on our podcast. Welcome again.
Well, thank you, Hagi. I'm delighted to be here with you for this podcast. And so always excited to talk about networking.
Yeah. And I would, although you should be the one who should be doing the talking in this podcast, I just want to start out with the story how we met, because it's also, at least what I think, a networking story. It was in 2004 or 2005, a conference in Hawaii. Nice place to have a conference, by the way. And I knew that you had a very highly cited and impactful paper on networking out in the Journal for Organizational Behavior. So I contacted you by email and was very happy that you responded to me. And we sat down at the conference, I think, to have a coffee or a Coke together and just talked about our research. And after that, you told me, and it was just my first conference in the US, and I didn't know nothing about these conferences, that there was the Careers Social Night at that evening, and you introduced me to so many people, and I'm still connected to quite a few of them. And that was, for me, a great experience and helped me actually to get my network in the United States go off. Thanks again. along the way.
Well, you're very welcome. And it's interesting because as I reflect on my career, I say to myself that, oh my goodness, that was like the best email that I ever responded to, where you said, hey, would you like to, I'm interested in networking research. I'm a doctoral student, and I know that you do work in this area. Would you like to get together to talk? And of course, we have published together multiple times over these many years. And so because of that email and getting together at that conference, it's really been one of the largest positive impacts on my career, hands down. So thank you.
And it also shows that you never know how a contact turns out, because we both probably didn't knew that we'd publish together and do things like that, and then still sit here after 20 years now doing a podcast.
Yes. And I give this example to my students in class because of that one email, right? I have been at the University of Cologne as a visiting professor 4 times. You've gotten to come to St. Ambrose a couple of times, and then your 2 PhD students spent 8 weeks at St. Ambrose, and because of one email.
Yeah, it was quite a fruitful email. I wonder whether you could tell us what got you interested in networking research.
It was really very interesting because I was in my PhD program in the early 1990s. So I started in 1991. And so mentoring research was really very big at the time with the publication of Kathy Cram's book in the 1980s. And I was always very interested in work relationships between supervisors and subordinates, mentors and proteges and such. But a lot of work had been done in that area. And one of my professors had actually mentioned about networking as being a potential topic, Tom Doherty, who's now retired from the University of Missouri. And that really struck a chord with me because networking was something that I was never comfortable with. I think I was very, my students won't believe this, but that I was very shy and more introverted. And I had recalled when I was a student at the University of Missouri, and we went to our first big conference, and it was the Academy of Management Conference. And I was rooming with somebody, it was she's now Dr. Rhonda Callister, and she was just amazing. I looked at her as being the most superb networker. So before the conference, she had the conference program back when they printed physical programs. And she had decided in advance, who she wanted to meet, and she put her schedule together. She would go to these sessions, and she could go up and introduce herself to these people and have a conversation. And then she had note cards where she took notes about the people that she met and what she learned about them. And I mean, she was just like the networking extraordinaire. And I'm like, wow, because the idea for me of walking up to somebody that I didn't know and starting a conversation was just pretty much terrifying. And Rhonda was about 10 years older than me. And it was just really interesting because then there was another colleague who was at a conference and just very, very uncomfortable with meeting people. And it got me to think about what led to who was more likely to engage in networking or not. And this one other colleague who was uncomfortable with it spent a lot of time in her hotel room as opposed to at the conference. And I just considered myself, I would just show up. But I might not go be proactive, but I would show up. And I've found out since in my career that showing up is just half the battle. So those two, really looking at these individuals and seeing myself as somewhere kind of in the middle, helped me think about who's more likely to engage in networking behavior. And so that was one of the first theses that I wanted to study for my dissertation research.
Yeah, that's a great observation there. And now you've done quite a few studies on networking. Maybe you can tell us what your most important or your insights are that you got from this research or also from your experience.
Well, I would say a few things as I think about the networking. And I know it sounds, how do I want to say, that it might seem very obvious. But at the time when I was doing my dissertation, there was very, very little research out on networking. Golden Penley had an article. Michael Nukel had an article. Fred Luthans had his book where it talked about the importance of networking and politicking. So really very little out there. On the other hand, there were tons of articles in magazines and newspapers about why women should play golf and to help build their networks. And that's the problem that women need to solve. Before I went into academia, I worked in public accounting for Deloitte Haskins and Sells, now, just known as Deloitte. And of course, it was a very male-dominated organization at the time. And so it was just interesting where you saw all these practitioner ideas about things that people should do, particularly women, in order to build their networks and become included, as opposed to, to help become a member of the old boys club, so to speak. So I was very interested in research, hadn't really looked at who was more likely to participate in networking. And so I was thinking about the literature and about the differences in my colleagues. And okay, it's no surprise, people who are more extroverted tend to be more likely to engage in networking behavior. I know that sounds obvious, but people hadn't examined it at that time, and happily it's been shown over and over and over again. I found other things like people who are higher in self-esteem, people who had more favorable attitudes towards workplace politics, people who might have a job that had more boundary-spanning type of requirements where essentially you have to network more, like people in sales, for example. And so I thought that was very interesting. Another article that I published looked at, does networking pay off for men like it does for women? And the answer was no, it doesn't. That women had basically reported networking in the same amounts as men, but men had reported more compensation and more promotions and such as a result. Of course, I think that the reason for that had been that men tended to network with people at higher levels of the organization who had more resources and abilities to provide assistance to them. So those were some of the things that I found, in that type of research.
When you think of your research and also your experience, what would you kind of recommend to people when they'd ask you, what should I do to network? Or is there something like do's and don'ts of networking?
Do's and don'ts of networking. That's a good one. That's a good question. One of the things that I tell people, well, actually, I'm going to back up. I think one of the books that I had read on networking is by Wayne Baker. And he said that networking is really about giving to other people. And that networking is about giving. And as a result of giving, as a result of helping other people, that they in turn, if you need something, is that they want to help you out. It's just natural because you develop this solid, trusting relationship with people. And I will say, when I was doing my dissertation research, before I did the survey portion, I was interviewing people about networking behavior. And particularly younger individuals tended to view networking as something that was like dirty, manipulative, underhanded, like it was an unfair way to get ahead in an organization. And like it wasn't fair. And of course, we know life isn't fair, but that was their views on networking. Older people didn't say that. They were just like, hey, part of my job is networking. It's important that I be out in the community and seeing and be a good representative for the organization. And another person said on how he networks and he's got a group of friends. He's like, if we lost our job on Friday, we'd have a new job on Monday. We had that kind of security going, that type of trusting relationship. So I think one of the things when I talk about networking with my students, so many of them think about networking as being all about me, and so they feel very uncomfortable with that. When you say that, hey, it's about giving to people and showing that you're somebody who comes through, you're reliable, you can count on, you're a trusted colleague, and so you really want to build your network before you actually need it for something. Another thing that I would say is people talk about organizations and groups to join. So whether it might be the JCs or like a Rotary Club or a Kiwanis or something like that. If you think about community organizations, for instance, or professional organizations, so whether it's the American Marketing Association or the Academy of Management or something, that just belonging to an organization, whether it be a professional organization or a community type organization, just belonging is not enough. that you really have to get involved in projects with other people, because then they see you in action. They see that you're a good contributor, that you can be relied on, that you have good ideas, that you participate, and then things happen. So, but simply just showing up is not enough. That you have to get engaged. And sometimes it can be, as you might say, well, I'll wait and have people ask me if I want to get engaged or how I want to get engaged. And my advice to students is that you need to be the instigator. So you need to be the one to say, hey, I've just joined this organization. What are some areas that I need some help with? I'd like to get involved. And so for you to take that first step is very important.
Yeah, something that I should do maybe as well.
It is funny because I will say I was joined the Davenport Rotary Club. So I will give you an example. And I had mentioned Rotary. I joined the Davenport Rotary Club because I had thought it would be a good way to meet people who are in the community. And this is another thing that I tell students, is that it's important to develop contacts both within your organization, within your profession, and then within the local community that you live in, because those contacts in your community, profession, and organization tend not to know one another. And so you can develop a lot of diverse contacts then, where you can get unique sources of information. And so I had moved back to Davenport, Iowa. I hadn't been there in 10 years, and I thought it would be helpful for me to know people in the community. And so I joined the Davenport Rotary Club. And so this was in the late 1990s. There weren't very many women in the Rotary Club, and I was 32 at the time, and most of the people in the Rotary Club were a lot older than me. And so I would show up to meetings, and it was kind of like I didn't have that much in common with the people at the tables that I was sitting at. I should have been more proactive. I recognize that in retrospect. But at one point, I was asked to chair a committee, and I wasn't comfortable chairing, but I said I would co-chair that committee with the person who was doing it, and that was on the International Youth Committee. And we made sure that our meetings were fun, and we might have held them in a local pub after working hours, and we always had good attendance. People could see that I was a contributor. I ended up being the third female president of the Davenport Rotary Club, which was a great opportunity, and I was on the board for 8 years or something like that. So yeah, it was a really good developmental opportunity, but it came really as a result of me getting involved. So just showing up was not enough.
Yeah, very, very good example. And also one that, is not specifically on gender, but do you have any recommendations for men or for women?
Recommendations for
networking,
for building their network. I think for my students, what I have, I put together this networking diagram exercise. And so I think they really need to consider what's their goal. For what purpose do they want to develop their network? What are they looking to gain by developing a network? What is it that they're looking for? And so then it's to be very much strategic. So as you think about people who, when you graduate from college, for example, learning doesn't end there. You need to stay up to date in your field, in your industry. And so perhaps they need to consider, is there a professional organization that would help me stay current on the skills and abilities, but also that I need, but also introduce me to other people who might be employers that I would want to work for potentially. And so then getting involved in that organization. So I think for both men and women, that's something to really figure out is what is the goal that you are trying to attain by building your network, and then being very strategic about how you go about doing that. So, but in terms of some of the actual activities, we know from our research that it helps women in particular to have networks that are composed of both men and women, because men tend to be more likely to provide instrumental benefits than women, because they tend to hold more power and influence and resources in organizations. On the other hand, I think for men, it's very important for them to have women in their network as well, because I mean, if you look at the population, they're dealing with a lot of women, and they will gain different perspectives from their own. So it really is important to have networks that are composed of men and women, people with different expertise and knowledge, etc.
Yeah, I think that is really a good recommendation to think about for both from a different angle. Yeah. The probably final question about online networking and the future of networking. What are your thoughts on that? Will we all be, I don't know, networking with AI only in hybrid contexts, or will we stay, well, in personal networking, or what are your thoughts about the future or guesses?
The future of networking. So it's very interesting because I know that both of us, we do research in the field of networking, but neither of us is known for our social media presence. Okay, so full disclosure here. But again, we have done research on LinkedIn, and one of the major findings was it's not the number of contacts that you have on LinkedIn. It's not the number of people that you're connected to that our research found, but it is the frequency of contact that you have with somebody, which shows to me that you've got a relationship where it's more of you have multiple interactions over time, and so people are communicating back and forth. They've developed a trusting relationship with, and that is the relationship that you turn to when you're really in need of some resources or advice or somebody to direct you in a particular direction, point you in a particular direction that would be helpful or useful to you. And so I think oftentimes that some people might be wasting their time. This is just my gut reaction. If they're just trying to have like the highest number of contacts on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever type of social media account that they have, if it's somebody that you really couldn't pick out of a crowd because you don't really know them. And so there is a limit to the number of close friends and acquaintances that we can have. And acquaintances are very important, but it's hard to have 5,000 acquaintances, for instance. And so I think being more mindful of the network that you are trying to develop on LinkedIn or whatever type of social media platform that you're using is very important, because it's hard to ask a favor of somebody that you've never met. You don't really have a relationship. You might be LinkedIn, but it's only because this person knew a couple of other of your acquaintances. So yeah, I think we need to come up with better guidelines for how to go about using social media so it's more effective for people.
Okay, thank you very much. We are through with the questions, but maybe you have some final thought that came up to you, and I just would like to give you the opportunity to have a last statement if you want one, but if you don't, we can just end here.
Final thoughts. I would say it's very interesting. I think I've been fortunate as somebody who wasn't particularly extroverted, but showing up is really, half the battle, right? And that you would show up and you'd start seeing the same faces over and over again, and you were able to just build relationships like that. And I would say that the relationships that I've built in my academic, my professional career have been really like the most rewarding part of absolutely one of the most rewarding parts of my career have been all of the faculty, the professionals that I have met through, for example, the Academy of Management, the conference that we're at now, where I get to see these individuals, once or twice a year at a conference. And I've ended up, researching and writing papers with them. But also my students. I had a text today from one of my former students who graduated about 15 years ago and just wanted to let me know how he felt his education was paying off once again and saying hello. And so it's really those relationships that have been, I would say, the most rewarding part of my career. And so if people think about networking as that way, about giving to other people, so it's not this devious, manipulated, underhanded way of getting things done. It's really about helping other individuals.
Great. Thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome.
Ja, vielen Dank, Hagi und Monika, für dieses spannende Interview. Ich möchte hier nochmal die Hauptaussagen von Monika zusammenfassen. Monika sagt, Networking ist vor allem das Geben. Also erfolgreiches Networking basiert darauf, anderen zu helfen und einen vertrauensvollen, zuverlässigen Eindruck zu hinterlassen. Dieses Geben führt oft dazu, dass andere im Gegenzug auch bereit sind zu helfen. Ein zweiter wichtiger Punkt ist das Thema Vielfalt der Netzwerke. Es ist also wichtig, Netzwerke innerhalb der eigenen Organisation, des Berufsfeldes oder auch der lokalen Gemeinde aufzubauen. Diese vielfältigen verschiedenen Kontakte bieten eine unterschiedliche Perspektive und auch unterschiedliche Ressourcen. Als dritter Punkt kann man nochmal auf die Geschlechterunterschiede eingehen. Studien zeigen, dass Männer häufiger Netzwerkvorteile haben, wie Beförderung oder ein höheres Gehalt, da sie tendenziell mit mächtigeren Personen innerhalb der Organisation in Kontakt stehen. Man muss dazu sagen, dass immer noch tendenziell auch die Personen in höheren Positionen Männer sind. Für Frauen ist es besonders wichtig, Netzwerke zu haben, in denen sowohl Männer als auch Frauen sind, um eben auch in Kontakt mit mächtigeren Personen zu sein. Umgekehrt ist es aber auch für Männer nicht unwichtig, Frauen in ihrem Netzwerk zu haben, um eben auch da diese verschiedenen Perspektiven und Ressourcen zu haben. Viertens kann man noch sagen, zum Thema Online versus persönliches Networking, die Anzahl der Kontakte auf Plattformen wie LinkedIn ist gar nicht so wichtig. Wichtiger ist eigentlich die Qualität und die Häufigkeit der Interaktion. Echte Verbindungen erfordern Vertrauen und wiederholte, bedeutungsvolle Interaktionen. Zusammenfassend kann man also auch sagen, als Tipps für erfolgreiches Networking, sei proaktiv. Es reicht nicht einfach nur zu einem Event hinzugehen. Man sollte sich aktiv in Projekte einbringen und Möglichkeiten ergreifen, um gesehen zu werden und auch um zu zeigen, dass man etwas bewegen kann, zuverlässig und kompetent ist. Zweitens, definiere dein Ziel. Was willst du mit deinem Netzwerk erreichen? Hab ein klares Ziel vor Augen und sei strategisch in der Auswahl und Pflege deiner Kontakte. Dabei hab im Hinterkopf, dass es jetzt ja gar nicht so ist, dass du deine Kontakte damit ausnutzt, sondern wie oben gesagt, es geht ja über das Geben. Auch du gibst deinem Netzwerk ja etwas zurück. Der dritte Punkt ist, einfach mal auftauchen. Das Erscheinen und das erste Kennenlernen ist schon mal die halbe Miete. Klar, das einfache Erscheinen reicht nicht, aber es ist der erste Schritt. Bevor du auf einer Konferenz nach dem Programm sagst, jetzt verziehe ich mich auf mein Hotelzimmer, trau dich doch nochmal und geh raus. Geh vielleicht auf das Konferenzdinner, geh nochmal in eine Bar und lerne einfach schon mal Menschen kennen. 4. Punkt, bring dich ein. 5. Punkt ist die Frequenz und Tiefe der Online-Interaktion. Also setze den Fokus auf die Qualität der Online-Kontakte und plane vielleicht auch oder pflege regelmäßige und bedeutungsvolle Interaktionen, anstatt nur auf die Quantität zu achten. 6. Punkt. Sieh Networking als positive gegenseitige Unterstützung. Networking sollte nicht als egoistisch oder manipulativ gesehen werden. Das ist eine Sichtweise, die vor allem bei jüngeren Menschen verbreitet ist. Und es geht vor allem darum, Beziehungen aufzubauen, die auf gegenseitiger Unterstützung und Vertrauen basieren. Monika vermittelt durch ihre persönlichen Anekdoten und professionellen Erfahrungen wertvolle Einblicke in die Kunst des Networking und zeigt, wie man langfristig erfolgreiche Beziehungen pflegen kann, vor allem erfolgreiche berufliche Beziehungen. Das zeigt ja auch, wie es mit Hagi gelaufen ist, wo eine E-Mail ganz, ganz viele weitere berufliche Zusammenarbeiten und Projekten noch hervorgebracht haben. Das war unsere heutige Folge vom Well Connected Podcast, heute mit einem Interview mit Dr. Monika Forret. Vielen Dank, Hagi, dass du das Interview geführt hast und wir freuen uns sehr, wenn ihr das nächste Mal wieder reinhört. Schreibt uns doch auch gerne sonst eine Mail oder kommentiert auf unserem LinkedIn-Kanal, wie ihr diese Folge fandet und was ihr euch für eine folgende Folge wünscht. Hört gern wieder rein und gutes Networking!